The last flight. The flight was supposed to be routine, just another trip from New York to London. Flight 297 was scheduled to take off at 10 p.m., and as passengers boarded, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Business people typed away on their laptops, families settled in with snacks and blankets, and flight attendants moved through the aisles with polite smiles. Elena, seated in 17A, was a nervous flyer. She gripped the armrest tightly as the plane taxied to the runway. She had taken a sedative just before boarding, but her anxiety was persistent. She glanced out the window at the black sky, which seemed to stretch infinitely, like a void waiting to swallow the plane. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, things settled. The hum of the engines became a soothing background noise. Passengers were served their meals, and the cabin lights dimmed. Elena closed her eyes, trying to relax. That's when she first noticed it, a strange sound, almost like faint whispers. She opened her eyes and looked around. The passengers near her were either sleeping or focused on their screens. She told herself it was just the wind or her imagination. 2 hours into the flight, turbulence struck. It was mild at first, causing a few drinks to spill. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The turbulence grew worse. The plane jolted violently, and passengers gasped. The overhead bins rattled, and a few dropped open, spilling bags onto the aisle. Elena gripped her seatbelt, her heart pounding. She glanced out the window again. The night sky was now swirling with dark clouds, and flashes of lightning illuminated the wings. The whispers returned, louder this time. Elena looked around, trying to locate their source. It wasn't coming from the passengers or the flight attendants. It was as if the plane itself was whispering. She leaned closer to the window, pressing her ear against the cold glass. For a moment, she thought she heard her name. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered and went out, plunging everyone into darkness. Panic spread like wildfire. Children cried, and adults shouted for the crew. The emergency lights came on, casting an eerie red glow across the cabin. Elena's anxiety skyrocketed. Then came the scream. It was high-pitched and filled with terror. It came from the back of the plane. Passengers turned in their seats, craning their necks to see what had happened. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Please remain calm," she called out, though her voice betrayed her fear. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt, unable to sit still any longer. She moved cautiously toward the back of the plane, where a small crowd had gathered. People were whispering and pointing. "What happened?" Elena asked a woman standing near the group. It's the man in 32C, the woman stammered. "He's gone." "Gone?" Elena repeated, confused. The flight attendant pushed through the crowd. "Everyone, please return to your seats," she said firmly. "We're handling the situation." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, but Elena lingered. She peered into the row where the man in 32C had been seated. His seatbelt was unfastened, and his seat was empty. On the floor beneath the seat, there was a small pool of liquid. It wasn't water. It was dark and thick, almost like tar. The whispers grew louder. Elena spun around, but there was no one near her. Her breath quickened as she backed away. She felt a cold breeze against her neck, impossible at 30,000 feet. More screams erupted, this time from the front of the plane. Elena rushed back to her seat, where passengers were pointing toward the cockpit door. It was ajar, and the shadows beyond it seemed to writhe unnaturally. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, but it was different now, distorted, wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are not alone." The cabin descended into chaos. People tried to open the emergency exits, only to find them sealed shut. The plane lurched violently, throwing passengers against their seats. Elena held onto her armrests, her knuckles white. The whispers became deafening. They weren't just voices, they were words, fragmented and chilling. "Join us, beneath the clouds, in the abyss." Elena's vision blurred. She felt a strange pull, as if something was trying to drag her out of her seat. She turned to her left and saw that the window beside her was no longer showing the night sky. Instead, it revealed a swirling vortex of shadows and faces, their mouths open in silent screams. One by one, passengers began to vanish. They didn't scream or struggle. They simply dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only their clothes and a faint, dark residue. Elena clung to her seat, tears streaming down her face. The flight attendants were gone. The whispers now formed a chorus, chanting something incomprehensible but deeply unsettling. Elena looked around and realized she was one of the few remaining passengers. The plane began to descend, but the view outside was not Earth. It was a vast, endless void filled with twisting shapes and glowing eyes. Elena's heart raced as she realized the plane was being pulled into the vortex. She closed her eyes, praying for it to end. The whispers enveloped her, and she felt her body grow weightless. She thought of her family, her friends, and all the things she would never do again. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the plane. She was floating in darkness, surrounded by the other passengers. Their faces were pale and lifeless, their eyes empty. Elena tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers had stopped. Now there was only silence. And in that silence, Elena understood. Flight 297 had never been destined for London. It had been destined for the void, a place where lost souls were trapped for eternity.